What is up, everyone? Welcome back to Julio GTV. Today, we have another episode of The Decree. Remember, that's the show where I bring you the latest from a local, national, or global standpoint with a focus on some of the legal aspects, but with the overall goal of uncovering the truth. And today, we are doing just that again and bringing you another video on the 2024 election, this time focusing on the numbers and the economy. We want to bring you this information so that way if you have not voted, you can take this information to help you make a decision or confirm your decision one way or another. But we think it is very important to bring you the numbers or what the numbers are fairly close to in terms of the economy. Again, so that way you are best informed for the decision that you want to make. If you've already voted, great work. I strongly encourage everyone to get out there and exercise their right to do so. And so with that, let's go ahead and jump into these numbers on the economy. First, I want to just mention that a lot of the information that I researched and eventually identified to be able to bring you the numbers on the economy was found primarily in the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, and also found in the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics, but also we found a lot of these numbers were confirmed or also reported on in secondary sources that were either very close to, identical, or similar, however you want to characterize it. These numbers are fairly close, but I think what's important more than just the number itself is the comparison between the Trump administration and the Biden-Harris administration, but also some of the aspects that affected those numbers and how you should be thinking about those with respect to how they affect the economy and the number itself. And so let's go ahead and jump right in. The first thing we want to talk about here, which really affects multiple factors in the economy and in this, in these numbers and the information I'm about to provide you, is inflation. And so, according to the government's Consumer Price Index, under the Trump administration, in his first 45 months, inflation was about 7.1%. with annualized inflation of about 1.9%. Under the Harris-Biden administration's first 45 months, inflation was up to about 20.1%, with an annualized inflation of about 5.4%. It's also important to mention that the year-over-year inflation hit a 40-year high under the Biden-Harris administration, which was at a peak of 9.1%, which was in June of 2022. Of course, it has since fallen since June of 22 till now, but it still remains higher than when Trump left office. So that's a very important factor there. Now you might wonder, okay, so what's contributing to this higher inflation and somewhat record high inflation historically under the Harris-Biden administration versus Trump? Well, I think we could point to two big events that have occurred within the last 4 to 5 years, specifically beginning with the pandemic. Of course, we were all locked down. People went on unemployment. Supply chains were disrupted. There were many factors from COVID that led to an increase in inflation, particularly after Trump left office and the Harris-Biden administration took over office. So that was a big one. But I think another one some folks may not realize, especially when I'm hearing them debating out there, whether it's in person, online, or just in public generally, is the Ukraine war. I think a lot of folks don't understand that wars have a severe impact all the way down to consumers like you and I. And so it's very important when we're thinking about who we're voting for in looking at the economy, that there's these other factors that are going to affect, when we go to the grocery store or wherever we're going to purchase something, that it's going to be affected by things that happen on the other side of the world. And so I think that's very important. And that's another reason as to the increase of inflation. But also another one was, what we like to call a stimulus or injection into the economy of cash, things of that nature. A lot of these was an increase of spending by the administration to try and help consumers and Americans deal with post-pandemic or during the pandemic. And so there are many things that factored to this inflation, but in my understanding and according to my research, these were the biggest to affect inflation. Now we'll look at employment during the Trump administration, and we'll look at the first 3 years. During those first 3 years during the Trump administration, almost 6.7 million jobs were added. And this is according to the data for the non-farm jobs, which covers about 80% of workers in the labor force. Under the Harris-Biden administration or Biden-Harris administration, there's been an increase of about 16 million jobs since they took over in 2021. Again, another reasoning for these numbers. What events, what situations, circumstances are affecting these numbers? Now, one might look at the numbers and stop researching. Well, I have to tell you that might be a big mistake, because whether or not it benefits Trump or the Biden administration in terms of numbers, we have to look at how they got there. One big factor for 16 million jobs under the Harris-Biden administration is that there was a severe and sharp rebound in economic activity as we came out of those post-pandemic lockdowns. And so one has to think, well, okay, would the Biden-Harris administration really created this many jobs had it not been for post-pandemic activity? Would they have been able to create this many jobs in a normal, stable, non-pandemic situation? I don't know. It's hard to say. But if we look at prior administrations, even before Trump, I would say probably not. So you got to think about those little, I like to call them, put a little asterisk on it when we're talking about these numbers, because it's really hard to determine, or it's really hard just to look at the numbers at face value. And I don't think you should. You got to dig a little bit deeper. And so, for example, many of the post-pandemic jobs would have come back regardless if there was a Biden or Trump administration back in 2020. And so, again, that's another asterisk we got to put there. But the other reason I bring that up is, and why I say, would Biden-Harris administration been as successful with jobs as it was during the administration, is, and what makes me question that is just the jobs report for last month had a very bad report. And the report was there was only 12,000 jobs added, making it the worst month for job growth since December 2020, which was Trump's last month in office. And so that tells you, okay, post-pandemic, situation. Of course, we're still trying to rebuild from the pandemic, things of that nature, but it goes to show, okay, back to the question, would the Biden-Harris administration been able to create that many jobs without post-pandemic activity or situation and circumstances? Well, when I look at the jobs report, 3 years or 2 years after the pandemic, wherever you want to put that date, it seems like the economy, in terms of jobs, did not have a good report last month. So definitely got to take that into consideration when we're looking at those two numbers. Now we'll move on to unemployment. Fairly straightforward. Prior to the pandemic, under the Trump administration, he delivered an unemployment rate of about 3.5%. Under the Biden-Harris administration, it dropped to pretty much the same thing, about 3.4%. I would like to say post-pandemic, which was about January 2023, according to this source. So it wasn't, marginally or, very different from the Trump administration. And so I think very comparable in terms of unemployment rate. However, I'll put another asterisk on this. Under the Biden-Harris administration, it's since gone up since January of 2023, which again makes you think, why is it that, after post-pandemic, the further and further we get, the numbers are going in the opposite direction? Now we'll look at the financial markets. Under Trump, there's an annualized return of 16.3%. Of course, the stock market isn't a reflection of the broader economy, but it's definitely important to many Americans like you and I who, make investments and things of that nature. So we are very invested and concerned about how the financial markets perform, because we're putting our hard-earned money into that. And so I think it's very important to list that factor as well. So again, under Trump, annualized return of 16.3%. Under Biden, we had an annualized return so far of 12.6%. So looks like, according to these numbers, the financial markets did better under Trump. Now we'll go ahead and move on really quick to a couple rapid fire topics, as I like to say. So first thing would be housing or shelter. Overall, these prices have increased nearly 23.4% since August 2020. Particularly, apartment rent prices have increased from 7.1% to 23% under Biden. So in other words, under Trump, apartment rents rose 7.1%. Under Biden, they rose 23%. Now, when we look at home or, single family homes, things of that nature, rent prices, those increased 15% over the entire Trump administration. And so far under the Biden administration, they've increased 30%. In terms of energy, talking oil, vehicles, things of that nature, transportation, overall energy costs have increased to about 42.4% over the past 4 years. Overall prices of gasoline have risen about nearly 52.9% in the last 4 years. New vehicle prices are up 19.5%. Used cars and trucks up 17.9%. Insurance up nearly 52.4%. And then, of course, fares for airline prices, things of that nature, up approximately 21.7%. Another important factor for you and I are healthcare costs. Healthcare costs have increased at a slower rate than some of the other categories, but for medical care services, about 7.1% since August 2020. And particularly for hospital services, those are up about 17.8%. And so now we want to move to another big topic that, you and I are affected on almost on a definitely maybe a weekly or almost, every other day basis, is food, groceries, necessities, things of that nature. Overall, food prices under the Trump administration rose 5.3% during his first 3 years in office. On the other hand, under the Harris-Biden administration, first 3 years in office, food prices have risen by approximately 20.3%. If we want to break that down a little bit further, baked goods, cereal, things of that nature, 25.6% increase under Biden-Harris administration's first 3 years. Non-alcoholic beverage prices have also rose faster by about 21.4%. Meats, poultry, fish, and eggs collectively rose by about 20.2%. If you single out eggs by themselves, you're going to see a drastically higher number there, as eggs have significantly increased on their own. But again, put another asterisk next to food and groceries and necessities. What's causing this? The inflation. What's caused the inflation? Well, go back to those reasons I gave you there, and some of the other reasons you might find for an increase of inflation, due to again, pandemic, wars, things of that nature. And so we all of these things work together, and we have to remember that one thing in the economy, one factor in the economy, such as energy, could certainly affect another factor, such as food. another example, a rise in labor, a rise in feed, things of that nature. And so it's important to keep that in mind. Lastly, what we have here is wages. Wages did rise under Trump by about 3% or just over 3%, according to this source and number here. Under Biden, the average weekly earnings have grown, but again, another asterisk. They've struggled to keep up with inflation. So it's tough to compare wages just based upon the wage number only and not adjusting it for inflation. And the reason we don't want to look at just the wage number by itself is because if we have an increase in cost, then that's going to make a huge difference on our wages, even though we're making more now than we would have in the past. And so when adjusted for inflation, average weekly wages are less when Mr. Biden or Biden-Harris administration came into office. Thus, essentially, when adjusted for inflation, you and I have lost purchasing power, even though we may have made more money over the last 4 years or so. One huge example, I think you've heard this claim by one candidate in particular, is that since the Biden-Harris administration took office, we've had an increased spending in terms of, you and I, our fellow Americans, have had to spend approximately $30,000 over the past, years of the Biden-Harris administration, particularly from the point they took office through August of 2024. We've had to spend about $30,000 due to the increase of costs. So again, back to tying the wages and inflation together, is we might have made more money, but it's not feeling like we've made more money because inflation is much higher. That means costs are much higher, and that means less money are in our pocket, even though we've made more money over the last 4 years than we did in the previous 4 years. So it's almost like the saying goes, you got to learn how to budget, despite how much you're making. Because if I make, $100,000 versus $50,000 and I spend $80,000, but I only spend $30,000 if I were making $30,000, if I were making $50,000, I still got $80,000 at the end of the day. And so you got to put those numbers into context that, okay, I might be making more, but I'm having to spend more to get the same thing. So, technically, I might be working harder to get the same thing that I did when I was, maybe not working as hard or paid less in situations before. So again, you got to just kind of think about these from a very basic, common sense level, and it'll start to become a little bit more clear that, when you break it down to this nature, then you'll start to understand some of these terms that, MSM and these other folks try to confuse us on and, really dissuade us and discourage us from looking a little bit further at it. But, when you start to understand and identify these other aspects, it'll all start to come together and you'll be able to make a better informed decision. And so I think you want to think of examples like that when you're looking at these numbers. So, tying it all back together, I think, again, just speaking about the economy in general, yes, look at all the numbers as we have in this video, but also look at the reasoning for the numbers and how we got to the numbers. What events around the world, globally, like I said earlier, nationally, or even locally, in your neighborhood or in your state. What policies are affecting prices? What policies are affecting costs of everyday items that even though we might be making more money, it doesn't feel like we're getting ahead? And I would say on that topic, really take this information to heart, take it to the bank, and use it to help you make an informed decision in your personal life. And when you go to cash in that vote on Tuesday for the election, I think it's really important that we consider these numbers and this information. And whether you vote one way or another, I strongly encourage you to vote. We all have to vote. When I look at the eligible voters in this country, it makes me a little bit discouraged. because, if my numbers are correct, it's about half, if not less. So there's plenty more Americans that can vote, register to vote, and do their duty as an American. And so I think let's all get engaged. The more we're all engaged, the more our needs and wants will be expressed at the higher levels and when policy is being made. So that way you and I will continue to flourish and have a better life for ourselves, for our families, our friends, and just our community. And so, again, thank you guys for watching and tuning in to Julio G TV and another episode of The Decree. If you can, it's very easy. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed to our channel just yet. And also go ahead and hit that like button if you got some value out of this video. And if you like, once you're subscribed, you could turn on the notifications and that'll tell you when I upload any new content and videos. If you keep supporting, Julio G TV will keep growing. Again, everyone get out and vote on Tuesday. You won't regret it. Again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.